Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm your host, Jon Macri, and today we have another special Dynasty Rankings edition of the pod where this time I will be going over my top 20 Dynasty linebackers. Last week, I went over my top 20 edge defenders, dropped what I think was plenty of useful nuggets in there for evaluating the position, and I plan on doing the same again today here for the more popular IDP position where tackles are king. It's Dynasty linebackers, so let's get it. Linebackers, and more linebackers. That's the focus today. These are my updated Dynasty ranks. I mentioned this last episode with the edges, but we did a full Dynasty rankings episode prior to free agency and the NFL draft. So now this is kind of like a freshening up of sorts for the ranks now that new contracts have been handed out and rookies have been drafted to new homes as well. I'll be talking defensive backs and defensive tackles here in the coming weeks as well. Just to kind of complete the set here before we get into the full redraft swing of things. So last episode with the edge position, I kind of started off by going over why the edge position is the most valuable position in IDP, and especially for Dynasty, right? And then the TLDR version of that essentially comes down to talent and replaceability. Or I guess irreplaceability is more appropriate for the position. And since it's just harder to find in-season replacements along the defensive line, and it's a position that banks so much on talent, right? So that value, obviously, it's going to depend on scoring for your leagues. There are plenty of IDP leagues out there where tackles are far and away the greatest contributor to your weekly and annual fantasy points leaders. And, in that case, I think that's fine. But, linebackers are definitely going to be valued higher in that case, right? At the same time, I'd also argue to find like a more balanced scoring system, right? That just allows all positions to be valued closer to equal, right? So, for example, big three scoring allows a little bit more big plays, things like that. Like using that kind of system instead of like an IDP, ABC 1, 2, 3, whatever it's called, whatever other options there are that just kind of overvalue the linebacker position, right? So if we want our scoring system to reflect like actual NFL value, then using a more balanced system is the way to go. Play around with the settings in your league until you find, what works best for you in your league, things like that. So yes, linebackers definitely, they can be the most valuable position in IDP if your scoring system allows them to. But generally speaking, they're also much more replaceable in season because they're production is largely predicated on playing time, right? And if a starting linebacker goes down due to injury, the next man up can step in and produce at a comparable rate. And that just isn't always the case for the defensive line, right? Like for every Tuli Tuipulotu and Andrew Van Ginkel out there, those guys are both great waiver wire additions last year. There's just many more examples of those guys at linebacker, right? So Nate Landman, Terrell Bernard, EJ Speed, Nicholas Morrow, Kaliki Hudson, Landon Roberts, Marquise Bell, Jack Gibbons, Drew Tranquil, Ivan Pace, like the list goes on and on. It happens every single year too, right? So the other thing with that is that replaceability isn't just the case in season. We see it year to year as well, right? So that's kind of why, like for Dynasty linebacker rankings, so much of it for me is just a combination of how well I think they can produce in the short term due to having a starting job, and then how secure I feel that starting job is going to be beyond this season, right? So even if it's not necessarily with the team they're currently on, I'm trying to kind of gauge the NFL's temperature on a player, which almost always comes back to draft capital to figure out how many shots to start that these guys will continue to get in the league down the road. So usually, again, that's almost always predicated on draft capital, where if you're a first round linebacker, for example, as long as you're not a complete F up or riddled with injuries, then you're going to get chances to play significant snaps. And I actually highlighted that in the rookie linebacker episode from a few weeks ago. I don't have the slides still with me. But it basically showing that, the difference in average playing time based on where a linebacker was drafted, right? And round one linebackers averaged well over 600 snaps to start their career in year one at a minimum. And that really lasts like well into like year 7 for them if they're still in the league. And again, it's on average, but it's because those are the guys that continually get shots in the NFL. And, as you went through the draft capital, those snaps became less and less. And second round capital, it was a pretty big drop off from round one draft capital as well, right? It wasn't bad. But for the second round, it is fine. But for those later rounds, it's more about if a guy can prove himself, earn a decent contract, then that's what kind of keeps them around as well. But it's much harder to do. And there's a lot fewer examples of them compared to the sample size of players, right? So teams, they're going to look to upgrade the position every offseason, give different players a shot, or draft replacements even. It happens every year because it's such a difficult position to play. But the one thing that helps them stick around is that high draft capital. So that's going to play at least some part in the ranks today. There is some production bias in there as well, but it doesn't play nearly as much of an important part for dynasty purposes as you might bank on for redraft, for example. So I think that's probably enough rationale on dynasty linebacker value here. We'll get into the actual ranks. Again, it's just me today. You get to, I apologize, I don't have a guest. It's an easier way for me to kind of go through my rankings quickly and list as many players as possible. So I appreciate you all bearing with me, but let's start at LB1 here for dynasty. And for me, it is Roquan Smith of the Baltimore Ravens. A lot of the reasons that I just went over, he checks a lot of those boxes as a linebacker who I think is going to be in the NFL for a long time, right? He evidenced by kind of being the highest paid linebacker in the league. Like he's locked in as a starter for future seasons, adding to his value. And I think what puts him probably just ahead of the next name on the list is that he's one of the elite tacklers at the position as well, right? So in 2023, Roquan ranked 99th percentile in tackles over expected, and he's finished among the elite in that regard for 3 straight seasons now, which is the level of consistency that we absolutely love from the position. Talking about the tackles versus expected, I talked about the stability of expected sacks last episode for the edge group and how it's, the most stable and predictive metric we have for the defensive line. And while the linebacker position, it's a lot more unstable. After running the numbers and playing with the formula a bit more this year, it actually is the tackles versus expected numbers that were the most stable year to year for the linebacker position. It's not an amazing number at about 58% correlation year to year, but still better than anything else we have to value the position. So we'll be referencing that a fair bit here as well. So Roquan has been 95th percentile above in that metric for each of the past 3 years. He's LB1 for me, just 27 years old, just turned 27. I have the most confidence in him basically sticking around long term. All right, next name on the list is Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers. And he was really close to Roquan for me at number 1. And again, it just kind of comes back to that long-term trust for dynasty, right? He's viewed highly by the NFL as an elite player at his position. He's the second highest paid player at his position, and he's earned that. He's the number 1 graded linebacker again here at PFF this past season. Not everyone is crazy about Fred Warner for redraft necessarily because he isn't necessarily like the high-end tackler that Roquan is, which was kind of the tiebreaker for me. But for all the other reasons that Roquan was number 1 on this list, Warner's right there with him for Dynasty with just like a slightly lower tackle floor, which I think we live with in Dynasty for the sake of him being startable for multiple years, right? He's still an excellent IDP and one that I just don't have any concerns about long-term. So I'm fine investing in highly on him for Dynasty purposes. He'll likely be lower in the redraft ranks though. All right, next name on the list is an elite tackler and a player that has emerged to kind of buck the trend of linebackers drafted outside of the first 2 days of the NFL draft to be held in high regard in the NFL. It is Foye Oluokun of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's number 3 for me. And actually, I think there's probably an argument to move him up now since he signed that new contract extension. I think you can. All 4 of these guys that I'm going to talk about here at the top, like they're all in the same tier for me. So it doesn't really matter how you kind of slice them. But Jacksonville just paid him again. Like they gave him an extension. He's earned it. He's posted strong grades. He's been among the league leaders in total tackles in each of the past 3 seasons. At least 170 total tackles each year since 2021. He's consistently among the leaders in that tackles over expected metric as well. Top 95th percentile in tackles versus expected in each of the past 3 seasons. You know what? Honestly, like with that contract extension now, I think Foye probably has just as strong an argument as anyone to be number 1 on this list now. Like, again, they're all in the same tier, but if you want him as LB1, I'd have no problem with that. Number 4, and I think just in terms of this top tier, he's probably the closest to tier 2 for me, but I'm keeping him here for now because I'm a believer in him, and I think his production and long-term security is in a good spot. It's Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's kind of a bet on talent here for me with Bolton because he doesn't have like a long-term deal in place, right? He's entering the final year of his rookie contract. I mean, he's not even the highest paid linebacker on the Chiefs right now, but whether he stays in Kansas City or not, like I really believe he'll be LB1 somewhere, regardless of what happens beyond this year and the team that he lands on, right? Like it might actually be better for Bolton to leave Kansas City. Sorry, Chiefs fans, but like Steve Spagnuolo is signed there, presumably long-term. He just got an extension himself. We know Spags likes to kind of play shenanigans a little bit with linebacker deployment. We got a little bit more of that than we would have liked this past year with Bolton, but not a huge concern. It's also a man-heavy defensive scheme that isn't necessarily the most conducive to linebacker production. You can see my linebacker scheme projections article. I'll link that in the episode description as well for more info there. But even with that considered, like Bolton is still an elite tackler at the position. Another one of those guys who constantly shows up at the top of the tackles versus expected chart. He missed half the regular season last year and still ranked among the 85th percentile at his position after finishing 99th percentile in both 2021 and 2022 in tackles versus expected. So whether Bolton continues his career with Kansas City or goes elsewhere beyond this season, I guess it's TBD, but like either way, there aren't many more linebackers out there right now who have proven elite production to go along with like performance, draft capital, long-term potential, at least that I think that I'd feel too comfortable swapping him out of this spot. So maybe he could be moved to tier 2, but I don't know. I'm pretty confident he'll get a nice second contract in the NFL and it would be right back in that tier 1 anyway. So for now, he stays in tier 1. Okay, number 5, my guy TJ Edwards is next up on the list for the Dynasty ranks, and he's one that I probably have a little bias for him to have him this high in the ranks, especially considering that Edwards is a former UDFA, so he doesn't have that high draft capital to back him up. But I've long been a fan of his. You know, coming out of Wisconsin, he was kind of my Ivan Pace UDFA darling before Ivan Pace, and all he's done when given the opportunity is consistently produce for IDP while posting very good PFF grades year in and year out. He's also locked in as a starter for Chicago. He signed a 3-year deal last offseason with them. He was their best linebacker this year, despite not getting close to paid as if he was, but I'll get into that more in a bit. Anyways, coming off another strong season with a new team, I just expect that high-end production to continue for him, at least for a few more years, and that's the reason. You know, he's always one of my favorite IDP linebackers to target. So TJ Edwards is LB5. LB6 on the list here is Ernest Jones of the Los Angeles Rams. He came through, he delivered on that breakout season that I think we were all expecting from him in 2023. finished 97th percentile in tackles versus expected, posted an elite 90.0 run defense grade, 82.1 overall grade. That was a top 10 mark at the position there as well. So, it's kind of interesting. Like, it was against the run. Like, when Ernest Jones was against the run, he was unreal. He had plus 22.5 total tackles over expected against the run. That is the highest mark for his position. And then, against the pass, he was negative 6.8. So I don't know how stable that is. I only really started parsing out the run versus pass tackles versus expected this year. So we'll see if that continues into the following years. But I still love to see what we got from Ernest Jones at 24 years old. He's locked into it as a starter this year for the Rams. The team really did absolutely nothing to address the position for the future this offseason, which kind of tells me they'll maybe be looking at a way to keep Ernest beyond this year. I think there should be a decent chance of that, and that he'll get another starting job, beyond this year based on his play this year. So that this year is going to tell us a lot, obviously, but he really played well last year. So I have confidence in Ernest Jones. Number 7 is Zaire Franklin. So he was previously, I think, LB9 on the list when we did this a few months back prior to free agency in the draft. But since then, the Colts have actually given him a pretty nice 3-year contract extension, which locks him into a starting role for a few more seasons. So he now has more job security than most linebackers, as well as, just coming off a career year in terms of production as well. So 93rd percentile in tackles versus expected this past year for Zaire Franklin. And, I know there are people that believe EJ Speed is the better producer, and they're worried about him cutting down Franklin's production, which did happen near the end of this past year, but it's also a really small sample size of literally like 4 or 5 games, I think, at the most. So it's not enough to knock Franklin down the ranks too much, in my opinion. Like, it's fine to draft EJ Speed and redraft among other starting linebackers, but I don't think that's necessarily has to come at the cost of Zaire Franklin. So yeah, Franklin locked in as a starter in Indy now, thanks to that new contract. Proven season-long producer, coming off the best year of his career. That equals LB7 for me in the dynasty ranks. Speaking of new and encouraging contracts, Azeez Al-Shaair was not within the top 12 prior to free agency because he wasn't on a team at the time, but that is how fast things can change with this position, because DeMeco Ryans of the Houston Texans went out and handpicked his LB1 in free agency, signs Al-Shaair, who he's worked with in San Francisco, gives him a 3-year deal, and now that kind of long-term confidence boost in Azeez Al-Shaair jumps, I think, quite a bit. Plus, he's coming off his most productive season as well. So actually kind of similar to Ernest Jones. Like, it's a little funny with him, at least from last season, is that his splits against the run and pass are among the most dramatic as any linebacker, where he was 99th percentile in tackles over expected against the run, and then just 3rd percentile against the pass. He was plus 17.6 against the run, negative 16.5 against the pass. Again, no idea if that will stick into 2024 or not, but either way, as long as they're not both negative, then that's what we care about most, along with playing time, of course. And AAS is locked into that playing time now in Houston, with DeMeco unlikely going anywhere thanks to his first-year success last year as a head coach as well. All right. Bobby Okereke of the New York Giants is LB9 for me. I like Bobby O. I think he's been a perfectly, productive IDP in recent years. There isn't really a lot of concern about his starting status either. Like, he's signed long-term with the team, with the Giants. You got Shane Bowen coming over from Tennessee to be the new defensive coordinator there in New York, replacing Wink Martindale. Bowen did run like at least a somewhat similar defensive scheme in that it was well above average in man coverage schemes and more of that one linebacker heavy system, just generally speaking. And Okereke, he's going to be fine. He's the lone linebacker there that I don't think is much of a question that he's going to be that guy. So, tackle efficiency might be hurt a bit because of that man heavy defense, but he's another guy locked into a starting role thanks to a decent contract there. So no real concerns there for Bobby Okereke in this range. Logan Wilson is number 10 for me. I've actually moved him down since version 1 of these dynasty ranks in February, just as I move guys like Azeez Al-Shaair and Bobby O up the ranks. The tiebreakers really just basically defensive system and pass production for me with Logan Wilson, who, he ranked 6th percentile in tackles versus expected this past season. Interestingly, more than 100% of those total negative tackles came against the run. And then he actually was like plus 2.1 against the pass. So more weird stuff there. And again, unsure how much that'll translate year to year, because this was the first season that I started including the run versus pass splits on their own. But Logan Wilson of the Cincinnati Bengals, kind of the perfect example of just, being confident in him as a long-term starter in the NFL, which just kind of trumps what he's done as an IDP producer. So even though I don't love the overall production, I'm more comfortable with him in Dynasty, but he's another one that'll probably be lower for me in redraft. Number 11 is Quay Walker of the Green Bay Packers, and a player I think there's probably some understandable hesitance with after the team also drafted Edgerrin Cooper in the second round this year. But I guess for me, obviously by leaving him in the top 12, I'm not overly concerned about it. I think it could happen that Green Bay moves on after his rookie contract, but the thing with Quay is that he has that all important first round capital, right? Where I just talked about it at the top. These guys keep getting more opportunities. So more so than any other linebacker at the position. So it just feels like an obvious statement to make, right? That, draft capital matters, but it does. It's a significant advantage in the favor of these first round linebackers that you kind of have to emphasize it a bit here. So Quay Walker, still really early in his NFL career, just 23 years old. So I think he can absolutely hit that stride, start to deliver that much higher production numbers fairly quickly here. It could be as soon as this season, but again, we talked about how as long as these first rounders aren't like massive F-ups, then they'll continue to get shots on teams. Now, maybe there's some concern there with Walker because he has had a few like boneheaded moves already in his career. So if we don't get some maturity there, then, he'll probably fall pretty quickly in these ranks. But I think for now, I'm okay with him staying inside the top 12 for me. And then at number 12 is Devin Lloyd of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So really similar, I think, to Quay Walker in that he was also a first round pick in that 2022 draft class and got off to a different rockier start to his career when, he kept losing snaps to Chad Muma. Like that was definitely concerning, but I think with his play this past year, he really kind of closed the door on a potential, I think, linebacker controversy there with Muma. Maybe hasn't locked the door, but it's at least closed now, right? And judging by how poorly Muma played last year when he was given the shot while Lloyd was out, I'm not totally convinced that the dude could even turn a doorknob at this point. So maybe Lloyd is a lot safer than we think. But yeah, Muma, he was one of the lowest graded linebackers in the entire league last year. He was not good. So meanwhile, you look at Devin Lloyd, he really improved his play, like to kind of solidify that starting every down role and delivered an elite 90.3 run defense grade that ranked 4th at the position, along with the good production numbers. Like I'm feeling much better about Devin Lloyd again. And I think that he'll probably always be, maybe overshadowed by Foye in Jacksonville for IDP, but I think still a perfectly fine IDP producer. And again, with that first round capital, he's going to continue to be valued highly in the NFL for a while if he can keep his nose clean and stay off the injury report. So like him there to round out the top 12. And number 13 now. So LB13 is, I guess another first round linebacker, right? He enters the mix here. And this might be a little high for people considering that he didn't play a lot last year, but Jack Campbell of the Detroit Lions is my LB13. Now, Campbell, I love as a player. I definitely think he's better than Alex Anzalone and, is deserving of a larger role. And maybe that's factored in here a bit for me. Too much, you think? I don't know. But I think we're all expecting more snaps from JC here in year 2 in 2024. Campbell played just 637 defensive snaps in the regular season as a rookie without missing a game. Which again, going back to the, playing time by draft capital chart that I had referenced at the top and had shown in the rookie linebacker episode, it's a below average number for first round linebackers. So year 2 numbers, that average playing time actually jumps pretty significantly to 825 defensive snaps for round 1 linebackers on average. And I think that should be the floor for Campbell this year, again, assuming health, but it also might not be far from his ceiling either, because the Prince of Asgard just refuses to relinquish his throne there in Detroit. Like, Anzalone, he signed through the 2025 season, and whatever blackmail he has on the Lions organization doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So I imagine he's going to continue being a thorn in the side of Jack Campbell IDP managers for another couple seasons. But if the cream is able to rise to the top, like we all expect it to with Campbell, then it could be shorter than that as well, right? And then once he gets that starting job, there's no turning back. So a little bit of short-term hesitancy for now for Campbell, while at the same time being fully confident in his long-term potential to emerge as an LB1. So I'm good with taking him here as LB13 in Dynasty. All right, next 2 names I could probably group together a little bit because they're both rookies from this past year's draft who I just have really relatively high expectations for. Junior Colson of the Los Angeles Chargers is LB14, and Edgerrin Cooper of the Green Bay Packers is LB15 for me. Now, why Colson over Cooper when Cooper was taken round 2 and Colson round 3? And this is maybe a little bit of pre-draft bias for me baked into it, right? I'm fine with anyone taking Cooper over Colson. It's probably logical just based on the draft capital alone, which we've been talking about nonstop. But for me, I love Colson. He was my pre-draft LB1, and he literally goes to the perfect team to make an impact right out the gate as a rookie, reuniting with Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter from last year at Michigan. Whether he gets the green dot or not in year 1, I don't think it really matters. I still think he'll be a starter and play a near every down role if Harbaugh's, if Harbaugh's last stint in the NFL told us anything about his personnel tendencies, of deploying 2 full-time linebackers. I love the opportunity for Colson. I think we'll quickly forget about that 3rd round capital thanks to the landing spot. So feeling good about him. And then for Cooper, it's a solid landing spot as well. Like, I don't think he necessarily has maybe LB1 potential right away in Green Bay with Quay Walker there. And even Isaiah McDuffie, who I still think could factor in a bit this season, but I love the draft capital, obviously, for Cooper. I think he can be a really reliable starter for IDP for years to come, and potentially be a really nice fit in Jeff Hafley's defense there, utilized as a pass rusher a little bit early on as well, get some big plays under his belt as a rookie. So even if he isn't necessarily an every down starter right away, I still have a lot of confidence there in Edgerrin Cooper at LB15. Okay, number 16 is a player who I feel like I'm constantly moving up and down the dynasty ranks because there's a little bit of me kind of questioning how much to believe with him, but ultimately I land on being a believer in him. It's Quincy Williams of the New York Jets. Now, one of the reasons Quincy's lower for me than he was when I did version 1 in February is that we've got some rookie risers in there. We got some free agency risers in there since then who I think I like their production potential a little bit more. And with Williams, as far as overall tackle production, he hasn't really been as productive as IDP managers might think, right? Despite 130 something tackles this past year, he actually produced well below his expected tackle total this past season. And yeah, let me see. Again, 4th percentile in tackles versus expected this past season with a negative 24.2 tackle total. So again, it tends to be our stickiest measurement for linebacker play year to year. That being said, Quincy was also 10th in PFF grade, 2nd in coverage grade. He made 2nd team All-Pro. Plus, he's now signed until 2026. So these are the things that matter most for Dynasty and projecting, long-term snap opportunities, things like that. So for me, he's another one that'll be lower than this rank in redraft, but I'm actually good with him in this range as in Dynasty as my LB16. You're fine to move him up a little bit if you'd like over the rookies and things like that. But that's kind of where he is in this range for me. Okay, another maybe controversial one here at LB 17, depending on what you're looking at. But this is, I think, just kind of the grossness of the linebacker position for Dynasty, where we may have to build in a little bit more projection as to what we think these players can be rather than what they've done so far. And Nakobe Dean of the Philadelphia Eagles is the perfect example of that for me. Let's be honest, like he's failed to deliver on expectations multiple times already in his young NFL career. I think, a lot of people had him pegged as like a first or second round prospect in the draft. He fell to the third round. Some people expected him to be a starter right away as a rookie. I did not, but some people did and might hold that against him as well. But he didn't deliver there either. Then last year, very obvious that he was going to start and have a breakout year. Well, he got injured and he only played 182 defensive snaps. So it hasn't been a great start for Nakobe Dean. However, this Eagles defense needs him. Like, they are barren at linebacker right now. We know this from last year. They want him to start, and it certainly feels like he's capable of starting. We saw him lead the best defense in the country in 2021 at Georgia to a national championship. He certainly has what it takes, I think, to kind of vault up this list with a strong year, but he hasn't shown it yet. So that's why this is really, I think, the absolute highest I can have him in my dynasty rankings for now, even though his potential is probably much higher, but his floor is also a lot lower, right? If he has another injury-riddled year, I think he could fall quite a bit by the time I do the 2025 dynasty ranking. So we'll see. He's a high risk, high reward type player entering a make or break year here. Nakobe Dean of the Philadelphia Eagles at LB 17. Okay, now right after Dean is kind of the point in the dynasty rankings where I'm starting to not try that hard to project young and future players to what they could be in the NFL. And, age is just going to factor in less and less here because we should really only be looking at this position for a couple years on average anyways, but maybe a bit longer at the top, but can be also much less than that as well, where we just aren't drafting guys or we just start drafting guys who are going to be contributing now, and then they're going to help us win a championship now, right? So that's kind of this range that we start to get into. And who better to personify that than Alex Singleton, aka Kingleton of the Denver Broncos, who truly is the tackling king of the NFL. There just isn't a more efficient player at the position, and there really hasn't been now for a few seasons than Kingleton. So he led the position in each of the past two seasons in tackles versus expected. He ranked 98th percentile the season before that. Like, the dude is a tackling machine. And regardless of what you think of him as an NFL player and how comfortable you are with him long term, this is the kind of range I think where I'm just fine drafting him for immediate production a bit more, right? And Kingleton, he's the guy for me, I think, here at LB 18. And you'll see more of these types of guys in this range in my rankings, the CJ Mosleys, Bobby Wagner's, Levante David, guys who are closer to the end of their careers, but I don't think there's any doubt about them starting in 2024. And that, I think, just keeps them valuable in Dynasty for me. Okay. Yeah. So someone who maybe doesn't fit that end of career description, but is still an expected locked in starter. It's Tremaine Edmunds of the Chicago Bears, who is signed to a 4-year deal. He signed that with Chicago last offseason. He's the third highest paid player at his position, to which I think all the confidence in him from Dynasty essentially comes from that contract, because let's be honest, when it comes to IDP production and really overall linebacker play, this dude has been the definition of mid, right? Like, I mean, let's look at it real quick, right? Like, what has Tremaine Edmunds done in his NFL career to earn a better contract than TJ Edwards? I'll wait. You look it up. And yeah, what you'll find is that he was drafted in the first round back in 2018, right? And TJ Edwards was a UDFA. There it is, right? We've been talking about it all episode, right? And this is a perfect example of it. TJ Edwards, Tremaine Edmunds Tremaine Edmonds is that first round capital bias kind of personified, right? Because TJ Edwards has greatly outperformed Edmonds to this point in their careers. Like since they entered the league, so Edmonds in 2018 and TJ Edwards in 2019, looking at their regular season numbers, 88.1 career overall grade for TJ Edwards, 57.4 for Tremaine Edmonds. 88.1 run defensive grade for TJ Edwards, 64.4 for Tremaine Edmonds. 82.2 pass rush grade for TJ Edwards, 51.6 for Tremaine Edmonds. 84.2 coverage grade for TJ Edwards, 50.3 for Tremaine Edmonds. 506 total tackles for TJ Edwards, 539 for Edmonds, who has played 942 more snaps than TJ Edwards. So that tackle efficiency means that 15.5% for TJ Edwards, 12.8% for Tremaine Edmonds, 12.8%, by the way, below average for the linebacker position. Edwards also has more career sacks, 7.5 versus TJ Edwards, 3.5. Like he has been Tremid Edmonds for his career so far. And again, that first round draft bias, it's going to keep him around, and that helps keep his dynasty stock afloat. And I think it's just a good lesson for betting on draft capital at the position. But man, Edwards definitely deserved a better contract. $6.5 million per year, like that's nice, but it's not 18 million, right? Like, goddamn, fire your agent, TJ Edwards. Hire me for your next contract. We'll get you paid more than Edmonds next time. I promise you that much. So that's the difference between the two. But Tremaine Edmonds, again, still a lot of confidence in him for long-term dynasty value. All right, last name on the list here, luckily, because I've got myself all worked up now here with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edward, but it's Frankie Luvu of the Washington Commanders. He's another one of those post-free agency risers for me. Signs a nice little 3-year, $36 million deal with the Commanders, and a really nice fit in Dan Quinn's defense here as a player who can play off ball and rush the passer as needed. I'm not necessarily in love with Luvu's history of tackle production. He ranked just 9th percentile last year in tackles versus expected at negative 19.0, but definitely offers more big play upside where, he can give us some nice sack numbers because of his pass rush ability. We saw that last year with 5.5 sacks. I think he had 7 the year before that. And Dan Quinn definitely going to utilize Luvu in that role there in Washington. So obviously I'll have Bobby Wagner higher for redraft, but age and contract factored in, Luvu gets the bump here for dynasty. So actually just quickly, like on the Washington linebackers, I will say just to kind of quickly like temper weekly expectations for production for both of these guys, Wagner and Luvu, because when I did the linebacker scheme projection article a few weeks ago, and again, I'll link that in the episode description, but Washington projected as the worst defense for linebacker tackle efficiency due to Dan Quinn's scheme. So definitely, can't be overly excited about either of these guys in redraft. I think they should still be perfectly fine and productive starters, but I think there's just, reason to temper expectations there based on scheme, which does play a large part in tackle efficiency. So that's the top 20. I guess I'll do a quick recap here. Oh, spoilers for the next episode. So a quick recap here for LB1 through 20. It was Roquan Smith at the very top for me of the Baltimore Ravens, followed by Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers at LB2. LB3, Foye Oluokun of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, probably an argument for him to be LB1 if you really wanted him to be with that new contract. LB4 was Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs. LB5 was the superior Chicago Bears linebacker TJ Edwards. Number 6 was Ernest Jones of the Los Angeles Rams. LB7 was Zaire Franklin. LB8 was Azeez Al-Shaair. LB9 was Bobby Okereke. LB10 was Logan Wilson. LB11, Quay Walker. LB12, Devin Lloyd. LB13, Jack Campbell. LB14, Junior Colson of the Los Angeles Chargers. LB15, another rookie, Edrin Cooper of the Green Bay Packers. LB16, Quincy Williams. LB17, Nakobe Dean. LB18, Alex Kingleton. LB19, Tremid Edmonds. And LB20, Frankie Luvu. So that's the top 20. You could check out the full IDP Dynasty Rankings article for free on PFF.com. Also, if you haven't already, I definitely recommend the Dynasty Edge Rankings episode, which is out now as well. There's some key information there about kind of projecting those guys going forward and why they're so valuable, even though, I know everyone loves linebackers more, but there's, I think, some valuable information in the Edge video as well. So that's going to do it for today. I can't thank you all enough for sticking with me here, listening to me monologue about linebackers. I hope you found it helpful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps me a ton. It motivates me to make more of those graphics for the lovely YouTube crowd as well, and I'd greatly appreciate it. So yeah, other than that, I dropped an article on PFF.com today going over the top positive and negative regression candidates along the defensive line for IDP. So using that handy expected sacks metric, which I covered on the pod last week, we can identify who those players are. So appreciate anybody who checks that out as well. But yeah, that's it. See you all next time. I'll be covering Dynasty defensive backs next week, but thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, peace out.